To him, it was this place where he was going to do an experiment. He was going to get people together.
Shocking secrets have been buried on the Kilcher Homestead for decades. The Kilcher family's 620 acres near Kachemak Bay aren't just a rugged paradise. They're a land where hidden conflicts and family mysteries have taken root. What the cameras of Alaska, the last frontier, never showed is far darker than the story fans have been told. So what was actually uncovered on the Kilcher Homestead? And why has the truth behind this family's past left insiders stunned? Join us as we reveal what they dug up near the Kilcher Homestead. The man who built it all was running from something. Everything starts with Yule Kilcher. And the first thing fans need to understand about him is that the founding of the homestead was not an act of simple optimism or pioneering spirit. It was an act of fear. Yule was born in Switzerland. He was a scholar, studied etymology, film, and the rise and fall of ancient civilizations at the University of Geneva. That last subject is the key, because Yule became obsessed with a pattern he believed he had identified across human history. That civilizations consistently collapse at the precise moment when the urban population outweighs the rural one. When the people who produce nothing outnumber the people who produce everything, the whole structure eventually falls. He believed this with the certainty of someone who had studied the evidence and worked out the math. And in the early 1930s, as Hitler's grip tightened across Europe and the warning signs that would become World War II became impossible to ignore, Yule looked at what was happening and decided he was watching civilization begin to collapse in real time. He did not wait around to be proven right. He left Switzerland, traveled through North America, hiked through British Columbia, and crossed Alaskan glaciers on foot until he found the land near Kachemak Bay that he would claim and never leave. In Alaska, he even changed his name from whatever he had been called in Switzerland to Yule 4 North Kilcher, a full reinvention, a man who looked at the coming catastrophe and built himself a new identity in the wilderness specifically designed to outlast it. He convinced others to come with him. Most couldn't get visas as war broke out. One person made it, Ruth Weber, a Swiss teenager who had been engaged to one of Yule's friends. She broke off that engagement, caught the last civilian ship out of Portugal, and arrived in Alaska carrying her mother's life savings a seamstress had spent years accumulating, earned from women, given to a daughter heading into the unknown. Yule met Ruth at the boat and reportedly asked where everyone else was. She told him she was it. They were married the next day. They began clearing land that week. They built their first cabin with axes and horses and hand saws and no power tools, clearing 50 acres of dense Alaskan forest by hand. There was no electricity, running water, and no road to Homer, which was 12 miles away. The only path to town was the beach at low tide. They raised 8 children in that cabin, homeschooled all of them, and built an intellectual community that would eventually draw philosophers, politicians, military figures, and spiritual leaders from around the world to a homestead in the Alaskan wilderness that had no phone. Yule became one of 55 delegates to help write Alaska's state constitution in 1955, arguably the most consequential thing he ever did, building conservation protections and native rights into the foundational law of the newest American state. He served in the Alaska Senate from 1963 to 1967. He made documentaries about homestead life and showed them across Europe. When he died in 1998 at 85, Alaska's governor ordered flags flown at half-staff. That is the Kilcher origin story. A man who read ancient civilizations and decided to build the one thing that had survived all of them: a self-sufficient family on a piece of land they controlled completely. But Yule Kilcher, the Grammy-nominated pop star, granddaughter of Yule and daughter of Atz, described her grandfather in her memoir as brilliant, charismatic, and someone who could be a mean-spirited, hard man, especially to those closest to him. The wilderness had produced something extraordinary. It had also produced something with edges nobody was advertising. So what happened when that inheritance passed from Yule to the next generation? And what did that generation carry that never made it onto the television show? The abuse cycle that ran through 3 generations. This is the part of the Kilcher story that Alaska, the last frontier, never addressed directly. The part that lives underneath the gorgeous cinematography and the satisfying seasonal rhythms of hunting and harvesting and building for winter. When Jewel published her memoir, Never Broken, in 2015, she did something that required real courage. She named what had happened to her in that homestead in specific, unambiguous terms. Her father, Atz, she wrote, had subjected her and her brothers to physical and mental abuse. People magazine reported that she wrote, "He disliked me at my first cry." She described leaving home at 15 years old because she had to get out. She paid rent and worked jobs in Homer, hitchhiking to work, just to not be in that house anymore. What Jewel also did, and this is equally important, was explain why. Her father, Atz, had served in Vietnam. He came home carrying PTSD so severe it had no name in his community, in a time when the words for what combat veterans were experiencing hadn't entered ordinary conversation yet. He drank to manage the anxiety. The drinking unlocked the rage, and the rage had a direction, downward, toward the people closest to him, his kids. But here is where it gets even more layered. Atz had not invented that behavior. He had inherited it. As Jewel told People in 2020, "As much as we have a genetic inheritance, we have an emotional inheritance. My dad was also raised in a wildly abusive home." Yule Kilcher, the philosopher, statesman, pioneer who wrote conservation law and spoke 8 languages and built an idealistic community from nothing, was, according to multiple family accounts, a hard and sometimes brutal father to the children he raised on that homestead. The man who had fled the collapse of European civilization had brought something corrosive with him across the glaciers. 3 generations of it. Yule's hardness to Atz, Atz's violence to his children. A cycle running through the same 620 acres where they hunted moose and sang folk songs for the cameras. Jewel said she knew, when she left at 15, that the statistics for girls in her situation were brutal, that she was supposed to repeat what she'd been through, or find someone who would do it to her. She decided she wouldn't. She went homeless in San Diego, lived in her car, battled kidney problems, shoplifted food. She eventually signed with Atlantic Records and released a debut album that sold 12 million copies. The girl who left the Kilcher Homestead at 15 to survive on her own became one of the most successful singer-songwriters of the 1990s. Her father, Atz, got sober in his 60s. Jewel, in an act that says something about the depth of her character, chose to forgive him. She described him as a great-grandfather to her son. She invited him on her handmade holiday tour and introduced him on stage as an example of how someone can change at any age. But here's what that story reveals about the homestead that the show never examined. The land that produced all of this strength, resilience, and beauty also held a cycle of harm that didn't break itself. It had to be consciously, deliberately shattered by someone willing to absorb the damage and refuse to pass it on. Jewel did that, and it cost her in ways the Discovery Channel cameras were never going to capture. What was happening to the men on the show during all of this? And how many times did the homestead itself nearly kill them? the land that keeps taking its price. If you watched Alaska, the last frontier across its 11 seasons, you became familiar with a particular dramatic formula. Someone on the homestead faces a life-threatening situation. The tension builds for 20 minutes of screen time, and then they survive. It felt, sometimes, like the danger was amplified for ratings. What was real was far more sobering. Otto Kilcher, the mechanic, the builder, the son of Yule, who became one of the show's most beloved characters, was trampled by a cow during a severe snowstorm. This was not a manufactured television moment. A 1,000-plus-pound animal hit him during brutal winter conditions. The cow punctured his lungs, broke his ribs, broke his arm, fractured his shoulder, and left him with additional injuries so severe his wife Charlotte initially could not even be admitted to see him in the hospital. He underwent multiple surgeries. There were blood clots from complications during recovery that threatened his life again after he had already survived the initial trauma. In any other setting, a man in his 70s being trampled by livestock in a blizzard would have a very different ending. Otto survived, but the price the land extracts is real. Lee Kilcher, Otto's nephew, Atz's son, one of the show's most adventurous characters, was hiking in Otter Cove in June 2015 when he fell off a cliff. The injuries were catastrophic. Broken arm, broken shoulder, broken ankle, broken hip, crushed ribs, 2 punctured lungs. He was airlifted out. The recovery took a year. During that same period, he and his wife Jane were facing criminal charges for illegal hunting, charges that arrived at the worst possible moment, while he was physically incapacitated and unable to appear in court. Those charges are their own separate story, and an important one. In September 2014, Lee and Jane were transported by helicopter to hunt a black bear near Bradley Lake, a clear violation of Alaska law, which prohibits using any aircraft in any way as part of a hunt. The hunt was filmed for the show. A former member of the production company then tipped off Alaska state troopers, and the charges followed. Lee told investigators that he had warned producers the helicopter hunt was illegal. According to a trooper's affidavit, the producers told him he should just go and it will work out. It did not work out. The production company, Wilma TV, a subsidiary of Discovery Studios, pleaded guilty to an amended charge and was fined $17,500. The criminal charges against Lee and Jane were eventually dismissed after they agreed to testify against the production company if needed. No bear was actually taken, which was central to their defense. But the episode exposed something that cut against the show's core image. A family that presented itself as the gold standard of ethical, sustainable living off the land had been pressured by television producers into conducting an illegal hunt, and the pressure had worked. PETA called Lee a coward. The hunting community was critical. The conservation community was critical. And the question that the charges raised about how much of the show's self-sufficient, law-abiding, nature-respecting image was authentic, and how much was shaped by what made better television was one Discovery Channel was never going to address directly. Lee's marriage to Jane was another loss the land eventually extracted. In August 2023, Jane announced on Facebook that Lee had filed for divorce. She described it as unfortunate and beyond her control. The couple, who had been one of the show's central relationships, who had appeared together across seasons, whose dynamic had given the show some of its most human moments, were done. So after all of it, the near deaths, the criminal charges, the divorce, the 11 seasons, why did Discovery actually let the show go dark? And what has the family been doing with the homestead since the cameras left? What the show hid? What Discovery didn't renew? and what the land is now. Alaska, The Last Frontier ran its final episode on November 13, 2022. Discovery has never officially canceled it. There has been no Season 12. The show sits in the same ambiguous limbo that networks use when they want a show to end without the politics of a formal cancellation announcement. What is true is this: the show was not entirely what it appeared to be. Screen Rant and other outlets that investigated behind-the-scenes realities found that the homestead, which was presented as remote and isolated, is 12 miles from Homer, a small but functional town with a Safeway, schools, a public library, and medical facilities. The family was never more than a short drive from help. The dramatic tension of survival was always happening within reach of civilization, surrounded by a film crew based in California. The crew, by design, could not intervene in homesteading tasks, but they could call for medical assistance, and they were always there. This doesn't mean the work was fake. The hunting, the building, the gardening, the cattle management, the brutal physical demands of an Alaskan winter, all of that was real and documented across 176 episodes. But the framing of existential, no-safety-net survival was, as the illegal bear hunt episode demonstrated, a construction that the production company had a financial interest in maintaining, sometimes to the point of pressuring cast members to break the law. Since the show ended, Ivan Kilcher has been candid about the adjustment. He drives heavy equipment now: landscaping, excavations, foundations, septic systems. He owns a construction company. He has said that while the break from filming was initially welcome, he misses the creative work and the focus on homesteading that the show allowed. He and Eve are building a YouTube presence and teaching sustainable living online. The homestead itself hasn't gone anywhere. It sits on 620 acres protected by a conservation easement that Yule set up before he died, a legal structure specifically designed to prevent the land from being divided, sold off, or turned into something other than what he had built. The trust is monitored twice yearly by the Kachemak Heritage Land Trust. The laws governing it were written by the same man who had written conservation protections into Alaska's state constitution decades earlier. Yule Kilcher, whatever his private failures, was building something he intended to outlast him. And in a real sense, it has. The Homestead Museum is open by appointment. Stella Vera Kilcher, seventh of the 8 siblings, one of 6 sisters, none of whom appeared as regulars on the show, runs Airbnb cabins on her 5-acre portion of the land and gives tours. She describes the homestead as still vibrating with a specific energy, a feeling she says visitors sense even when they know nothing of the history. In 2023, a local photographer in Homer bought a bag of old slide projector carousels from a Salvation Army thrift store for $1. Inside was a Crown Royal bag full of photographic slides. When he scanned and posted them online, Kilcher family members started reaching out within hours, including the older generation who had never seen some of the images. The slides contained photographs of Ruth Kilcher and her children from as far back as 1947 and 1948. Photographs they thought were lost forever. Images of the original homestead, the people who built it, the faces of Yule and Ruth as young parents, of Atz as a newborn in Switzerland. History the family had given up on ever recovering, turned up in a thrift store bag for $1. The homestead absorbs things, and eventually, sometimes, it gives them back. They dug up the history of lost photographs, turning up in a thrift store of a family that thought it had lost its earliest images of itself, found again by accident, by a stranger who paid $1. They dug up family secrets, years of abuse and realities that were hidden from the public. And underneath all of it, they dug up something that is harder to categorize, but more important than any of the specific facts. The Kilcher Homestead is a place that was built on a genuine idea. Ewell Kilcher looked at history and decided that the only thing that consistently survived civilizational collapse was a family that could feed itself, on land it controlled, with skills it preserved and passed on. He was difficult. He was sometimes brutal. He was also, by every available measure, right. The homestead is still there. The family is still on it. The conservation easement will keep it intact after all of them are gone. The trust Ewell built, legally, carefully, deliberately, will outlast every controversy, every canceled season, every divorce filing, every criminal charge. That is what they dug up. The complicated, painful, occasionally criminal, ultimately unbreakable truth of a family that came to Alaska because a man from Switzerland read the pattern of falling civilizations and decided not to be in one when it fell. What part of the Kilcher story surprised you most? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.